The other day I was grabbing a drink with an old friend. Let's call him Ken. At 42, Ken is the ultimate poster child for the East Asian success story. He's got the C-suite title, the sleek penthouse in the heart of the city, and a skincare routine that keeps him looking a decade younger. He spent his entire youth trading sleep and relationships for equity, operating on one singular, unshakable belief, that his success was a currency he could eventually use to buy back time, especially when it came to starting a family. He leaned back, swirling his whiskey with effortless confidence, and told me, "The best part about being a man is that our biological clock doesn't have a deadline. I built the fortress first. Now I can just pick the right person to move in and carry on the legacy whenever I'm ready." To him, his fertility was an immortal asset, a permanent get-out-of-jail-free card that allowed him to win the social race before even thinking about the biological one. He viewed his 20s and 30s as a strategic delay, a way to maximize his genetic value through wealth. But then, I mentioned the 2026 evolutionary verdict, the latest research on sperm RNA fragmentation. I told him about the molecular aging clock, and how after age 40, those tiny strands of genetic information don't just age. They undergo a catastrophic phase transition. I explained that the very urban stress he used to build his empire, the 80-hour weeks, the high-pressure boardrooms, the processed late-night meals, was actually acting like a chemical eraser on his genetic legacy. His hand paused mid-swirl. That smug, infinite option he'd banked his entire life on wasn't just depreciating. According to the latest data, it was hitting a wall. The safe, high-achiever strategy he followed was actually a biological trap. That look of sudden, cold realization on his face, the moment he realized the fortress he built might end up being a tomb for his lineage, is exactly the crisis currently dismantling the East Asian family myth. We spent a century believing we could outrun nature with social capital. But what happens when the biology we ignored finally sends us a debt collection notice? And more importantly, what happens when we realize the career-first contract was a scam all along?
It's the silence after the glass stops swirling that gets me.
Right.
That specific moment of realization Ken had, that he's been playing a game with rigged rules, is the exact same realization hitting the finance ministries in Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing right now. It's not just a personal crisis, it's a civilizational audit.
And the audit results are brutal.
Yeah.
We are here today to really unpack what we're calling the 2026 verdict.
Yeah.
We're looking at a collision that's been sort of invisible until now. You have the macroeconomic panic over pension collapses, which, everyone knows about.
That's been in the headlines for years.
Exactly. But then you have this new biological data, this sperm RNA clock,
Right.
that completely upends the logic of how we fix the economy.
It changes all the variables.
And then sitting on top of that, you have these massive social shifts, like the 4B movement. It's a perfect storm.
Exactly. The central thesis we're exploring is that the entire East Asian model of patriarchy and economic planning was built on a single, invisible structural beam. And that beam was the assumption that male fertility is static. The idea was that men can delay family indefinitely to build the capital necessary to support the family.
While women race against a biological clock, that was the trade.
That was the fundamental asymmetry. It allowed for the salaryman culture, the 996 work culture in China. It was all predicated on the idea that the man's biological contribution waits for him to be ready.
It's an asset with no expiration date, or so they thought.
But the beam has snapped. The biology isn't static, and when that beam snaps, the roof comes down on everything from fiscal policy to dating apps.
Let's start with the money, because that's usually where the panic starts. But I don't want to talk about GDP percentages yet. I want to talk about the human cost of that economic ambition. I have a story that I think perfectly illustrates the trap we're in.
Okay.
I heard a story recently from a colleague in Seoul about a man named Min Jun, a high-flying quantitative analyst who spent his entire 30s building his kingdom.
The Ken archetype, but in finance.
Precisely. In the hyper-competitive landscape of South Korea, Min Jun was the poster child of success. The late nights, the strategic investments, the meticulous delay of family life until his financial fortress was impenetrable.
He was following the script.
To the letter. He subscribed to the classic East Asian patriarchal myth that a man's fertility is a permanent asset, a biological blank check he could cash at 50. But in 2026, the sperm RNA clock research went viral, and Min Jun's world shifted.
The science hit the mainstream.
And he realized that while his bank account grew, his biological capital was undergoing a quiet, non-linear crash. I imagine him sitting in a sleek Gangnam office looking at a spreadsheet of his assets, only to realize that the most critical variable, his genetic integrity, had reached its expiration date while he was busy chasing a promotion.
Oh.
It's a chilling reminder that our macroeconomic models often ignore the most basic fiscal reality. Human capital isn't just about education or wealth. It's about the biological viability of the next generation.
It's the source code.
As a journalist, I find it fascinating yet tragic. We've built a society that demands we trade our peak biological years for economic stability, only to find that by the time we feel ready to provide, the very thing we wish to pass on has begun to degrade.
The trade was a lie.
It forces us to ask if our pension systems are even sustainable, if the labor pool they rely on is being compromised by the very stress required to fund them.
And that's the core question. Min-jin is the perfect case study because he did everything right according to the old playbook, and yet he represents a total failure of what economists call human capital formation. We need to really dig into what his realization means for the broader economy.
Okay, so let's start there. We hear the term demographic time bomb constantly. Usually it's just shorthand for old people live too long, young people aren't having babies. Is that what we're talking about here, or is this something different?
That's the surface level, and even that is terrifying. I mean, if you just look at the raw numbers, they are mind-boggling.
Give me an example.
Well, if you look at the projections from the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, or ERI, the numbers are catastrophic. Japan is staring down a fiscal deficit of 52 trillion yen by 2050 solely due to aging.
52 trillion yen. That number is so big it feels abstract. Can we ground that? What does a 52 trillion yen hole actually look like for a regular person living in Osaka or Tokyo?
It looks like a collapse of basic services. It's not just a number on a screen. To cover a hole that big, you either have to raise taxes by nearly 60%?
60%.
Almost 60%. Imagine your income tax effectively doubling overnight, or the alternative is you slash benefits by the same amount.
So what does that mean in practice? What gets slashed?
Everything. It looks like garbage collection stopping, or maybe it's once a month. It looks like bridges not getting repaired, roads full of potholes. It looks like waiting 6 months to see a doctor because the national health insurance can't pay the hospitals on time. It is the slow, grinding disintegration of the civil infrastructure that you take for granted.
And that's just the traditional model, the one we already knew about.
That's the old time bomb. That's assuming the workforce remains just as healthy and productive as it always has been, just smaller.
But Min-jun's story suggests something worse. It's not just that we have fewer workers to pay those taxes. It's that the workers we do have might be broken. Is that too strong a word?
It's not. This is the qualitative twist that the economists missed. For years, they've been talking about the 4.2.1 problem in China.
Right, one child supporting two parents and four grandparents.
Exactly. And that family structure was always dangerous, always fragile. But the assumption was that the one child would be a kind of super worker. Highly educated, healthy, hyper-productive, able to carry that immense burden.
The product of the best schools, the best nutrition, all the family's resources poured into one person.
Yes. But Min-jun's story introduces the biological expiration variable. If men delay fatherhood to accumulate wealth, and that delay degrades the genetic quality of their offspring via epigenetic damage, the next generation isn't just small, it's sickly.
So the one child who is supposed to support 6 elderly people might essentially be born with a higher risk of metabolic disease, cognitive issues, or chronic health problems.
That's the risk. Instead of a superworker generating tax revenue, you might have a citizen who requires high levels of medical care from day one. You turn a potential asset on the national balance sheet into a long-term liability.
So the dependency ratio, the ratio of workers to retirees, it doesn't just get worse mathematically because there are fewer workers.
No, it gets worse functionally. The workforce itself becomes less capable and more expensive to maintain from a healthcare perspective. It's a double whammy.
I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Please.
I was reading a working paper from the Levy Economics Institute, and they take a completely different view. They argue that this whole time bomb thing is a financial myth.
Ah, the MMT adjacent argument, modern monetary theory.
Right. They say we're obsessed with the money, the yen, the won, the yuan. But for a government that prints its own currency, money isn't the real issue. The issue is resources.
The real resource constraint versus the financial constraint. It's a heterodox economic view, but it's gaining traction. It's important to engage with it.
Their argument is basically, who cares if there are fewer people? We have robots. If AI and automation drive productivity through the roof, one worker or one robot can do the work of 10 people. So why do we need a massive population? Isn't Min-jun panicking over nothing? If he doesn't have kids, won't a bot just take care of him in the nursing home?
It's a very seductive argument, isn't it? The techno-optimist bailout. The robots will save us.
It sounds good on paper.
But there are two massive gaping flaws in that thinking when you apply it to the Minjan reality. First, consumption.
Meaning?
Robots can build cars, sure, they can flip burgers, but robots don't buy cars. They don't go to restaurants, they don't buy apartments. An economy is a cycle of production and consumption. If you have a shrinking population of lonely, elderly people who is driving the demand that keeps the economy spinning, who are you building the cars for?
Okay, so the economy shrinks. It becomes a smaller, quieter country.
Yeah.
But maybe the quality of life stays okay for the people who are left.
That brings us to the second, and I think more profound, flaw, the problem of care. The Levy paper talks about resource constraints. The most scarce resource in an aging society isn't manufacturing capability, it's human care.
You can't automate empathy.
You cannot automate the emotional and physical complexity of caring for a dementia patient or a sick child. You can have a robot deliver a pill on a schedule, but you can't have a robot hold a hand and provide comfort. You can't have a robot replace the social fabric. And if Minjan and his cohort stop reproducing because they miss their window, who provides that care?
We import it. Is that the answer?
That's the desperation move, which we'll get to. The point is, relying on AI to solve a biological collapse is wishful thinking. It completely misses the point. If the human capital itself is compromised, if the few children being born are dealing with the health consequences of their father's geriatric sperm, no amount of automation fixes the fact that the society is physically crumbling.
So the resource constraint they talk about becomes a crisis of flesh and blood, not just a shortage of labor hours.
It's a crisis of healthy bodies and sound minds, and that's a resource you can't just 3D print.
That phrase, geriatric sperm, it sounds wrong. It's jarring. We're so used to hearing geriatric pregnancy for women over 35.
We are.
But for men, we've always been told the factory never closes. Charlie Chaplin had a kid at 73. Mick Jagger, Robert De Niro, they're having kids when they're grandfathers. If they can do it, why is Minjan freaking out? Is the science actually solid here, or is this just alarmism?
This is where we have to shatter the biggest myth in reproductive biology. What you see with Jagger or De Niro is classic survivorship bias. It's a statistical illusion. You see the one healthy baby on the magazine cover. You don't see the miscarriages that might have preceded it. You don't see the developmental disorders that are statistically much more likely in that cohort. You don't see the spike in autism or schizophrenia linked to advanced paternal age.
We only see the successes.
We only see the successes. And most importantly, those men have functionally infinite resources to mitigate outcomes. They can afford the best IVF, the best prenatal care, the best specialists. For the average guy like Minjan or your friend Ken, the sperm RNA clock is a hard statistical reality.
Okay, let's get technical, but keep it simple for everyone.
Yeah.
I always thought sperm was just a delivery truck.
Yeah.
It has a tail, it swims, it drops off a package of DNA 23 chromosomes, and its job is done. Why does it matter how old the truck is if the package is sealed?
That's how we understood it for 50 years. Honestly, that was the textbook model. The sperm is just the genomic DNA, the hard drive with the blueprints.
Right.
But the new research, and this is coming from places like Frontiers in Cell and Developmental Biology, shows that sperm carries a massive payload of small non-coding RNAs.
Small non-coding RNAs. Break that down. If the DNA is the hard drive, what is this stuff?
Think of it like the operating system or the installation software for that hard drive. The DNA is the raw code, but this RNA tells the embryo how and when to read that code. It regulates gene expression in those critical first few days after fertilization before the embryo's own genome even switches on.
So it's the instruction manual for the hard drive.
It's the boot up sequence. It's the software that tells the hardware how to work. And if that instruction manual is ripped, corrupted, or has pages missing, it doesn't matter how pristine the hard drive is. The system won't boot correctly.
And the research shows that as men age, that instruction manual gets damaged.
And it's not a slow, gentle decline. The research indicates that after age 40, and sometimes as early as 35, the integrity of this RNA payload undergoes a phase transition.
A phase transition sounds like physics, like water turning to ice. You're saying it's that dramatic?
It is that dramatic. It's like a cliff. It's not a gentle slope. The complex mechanisms that proofread and maintain that RNA data just stop working as efficiently. The body, from an evolutionary perspective, stops prioritizing the integrity of this information as the male ages.
The warranty runs out.
The warranty runs out. But here is the part that connects back to Minjan's lifestyle. It's not just age. It's the environment. We're talking about soma to germline communication.
Soma to germline. That sounds like the body talking to the sperm. I thought there was a barrier. The Weismann barrier. I remember that from biology class.
We all learned about the Weismann barrier. We used to think that barrier was a fortress wall, an impenetrable division between the body's cells, the soma, and the germline cells like sperm. Nothing gets in.
But it's not a wall.
It's not a wall. We now know it's permeable. It's more like a semi-permeable membrane full of communication channels. And here's how it works, and it's absolutely fascinating. You know the epididymis.
The tube where sperm is stored matures, right?
Right. It takes about 74 days to make a new sperm cell, but then they sit in the epididymis for a while to mature. As they travel through that tube, the cells lining the tube release tiny bubbles called extracellular vesicles, or epididymisomes.
Bubbles of what?
Bubbles packed with RNA. These bubbles then fuse with the sperm cells that are passing by.
And you're saying the body is essentially sending text messages to the sperm while it's waiting in the tube, updating it.
It is constantly updating the sperm with the status report from the outside world, and the content of those text messages depends entirely on what the man is doing.
So if Minjun is stressed out of his mind, pumping cortisol because the market is crashing,
his body uploads stress files to the sperm. If he's eating processed, high-fat takeout at 2 a.m. every night because he's too busy to cook,
his body uploads metabolic chaos files.
Exactly. If he's breathing polluted city air, if he's not sleeping enough, all of that information, that environmental data gets written into the RNA payload of his sperm.
So the sperm is basically a USB drive. And as it passes through the body's uploading the latest status report from the front lines.
Yes. And if the status report says, the world is hostile, food is weird, and stress is high, that information gets passed to the embryo. The embryo then installs that software upon fertilization.
And what does that look like in the child? What does that software do?
It looks like preparation for a war that isn't happening. The child's metabolism is programmed to hoard fat because the father's body signaled scarcity or chaos. In a modern world of abundant calories, that leads to glucose intolerance and obesity.
Oh.
The child's brain is wired for hypervigilance because the father's body signaled constant threat. That leads to anxiety disorders and altered stress responses, a dysregulated HPA axis. The child is born pre-stressed.
So Minjun wasn't just burning himself out. He was encoding that burnout into the very biological material he was saving for later.
He was writing a tragedy into his own genetic code. His fortress of wealth was built on a foundation of biological sand. He thought he was sacrificing his time to provide for his future family, but the sacrifice itself, the stress, the bad food, the delay, ruined the product he wanted to pass on.
That completely reframes the concept of inheritance. We worry about inheritance tax, but the epigenetic inheritance tax is 100%. You can't dodge it.
You can't dodge it, and you can't buy your way out of it. And this is why the panic is setting in. Because once this information moves from the lab to the street, it changes the social contract. It changes the dating market.
It destroys the leverage. For decades, men like Ken, my friend with the whiskey, held the cards because they had time. Women had the biological clock, men had the bank account. But now, the clock is ticking for everyone.
The playing field has been leveled in the most brutal way possible.
And I want to share a story about how this is playing out in the dating scene in Tokyo, because it's already happening.
Let's hear it.
I saw an interesting thread online discussing the silent collapse of traditional family structures in Tokyo, centered around a man named Kenji. For years, Kenji felt a sense of unearned security. He believed he held the biological high ground in the dating market.
The biological high ground, that is such a crucial concept.
He felt that, unlike his female peers, he felt no rush. He watched the rise of the 4B movement and the increasing atomization of urban life with a detached indifference, assuming he could always reset and start a family in his 40s with a younger partner.
The classic strategy.
Then came the scientific confirmation of male reproductive finitude. Suddenly, the sperm RNA clock leveled the playing field, stripping away the biological leverage that had propped up the tail end of patriarchal expectations.
The high ground just crumbled away beneath his feet.
Try to imagine the shift in the air at a Tokyo mixer. The smugness of delayed fatherhood replaced by a frantic realization that the risk is now equalized. Kenji's story isn't just about one man. It's about the structural disintegration of an old myth.
And you see the reactions to this data.
I've noticed a lot of intense, even defensive reactions to this data from certain circles, and I understand the anxiety. It's the sound of a long-standing power dynamic shattering. While some might see this as a grim evolutionary dead end, I try to view it through a more neutral lens. We are witnessing the forced birth of a new social meaning. If the biological guarantee of lineage is gone, we have to find reasons to connect that aren't based on an assumed eternal fertility.
It's a renegotiation of everything.
It's a painful, but perhaps necessary step toward a more honest, if more atomized, urban existence.
The entire premise of the sugar daddy dynamic, or the older successful man trope, relies on the idea that the man brings resources and no biological downside.
The trade was, I have money, you have fertility, let's make a deal. That was the implicit contract.
But the sperm RNA clock turns that dating market into what economists call a market for lemons.
A lemon market, like for used cars.
Exactly. George Akerlof won a Nobel Prize for this. In a used car market, where the seller knows if the car is good or a lemon, but the buyer doesn't, there's an information asymmetry. The buyer can't tell which cars are broken, so they become unwilling to pay a high price for any car. The value of all cars drops, and good cars are driven out of the market.
So you're saying older men are now the used cars?
In this new information environment, every older man on a dating app is a potential lemon. He might look great, he might have a Porsche, but his biological payload might be corrupted. And there's no way for a woman to know, so the perceived value of the deal he's offering plummets.
The risk has been repriced. Women are realizing that the risk of partnering with a 45-year-old man isn't just, he might die sooner, it's, my child might have serious health issues because of him.
Which brings us directly to the 4B movement.
Yes. We've seen the headlines, but let's define it clearly. 4B stands for the 4 no's in Korean. Bihan,
No marriage.
Bichulsan,
No childbirth.
Bione,
No dating.
and Bisiksit. It's often portrayed in the West as a purely political protest. Women angry about the wage gap, or unequal division of housework, or sexism. And it is that.
It is definitely that. But when you layer the biological data on top of it, 4B stops looking like just a protest and starts looking like a rational market correction.
So, what do you mean by a market correction?
Well, think of it in terms of risk and reward. If the patriarchal bargain was already a bad deal for many women, you do all the housework, you sacrifice your career, you deal with the intense pressure from in-laws, the reward was, theoretically, a family and financial stability.
A deal many were already starting to reject.
Exactly. And now you add a new piece of information to the equation. The man's contribution involves a high risk of epigenetic damage to your potential children. The deal goes from bad to toxic. The 4B movement is effectively a massive consumer saying, the product is defective, we're not buying.
It validates the refusal. It's not just ideology anymore, it's a matter of health and safety. If Kenji is a potential biological risk, staying single isn't just a lifestyle choice. It's a protective measure for a woman's own potential future or her peace of mind.
And this is what terrifies the state. This leads to the securitization of demographics we mentioned earlier. The South Korean government, the Japanese government, they're watching the birth rate drop to 0.7, 0.6, even lower in some cities. They realize the domestic factory of human capital is shutting down because of this standoff.
So what do? If Kenji and the women of Tokyo aren't getting together, the population crash is mathematically inevitable.
They turn to immigration, but in a very specific, securitized way. It's not about open borders or multiculturalism. It's import the labor we need to keep the lights on. It's a purely functional transaction.
We see this with the expansion of visa programs for domestic workers and factory workers from Southeast Asia and Seoul and Tokyo.
Yes, but it creates a massive identity crisis, a deep-seated anxiety about what the nation is anymore. And this leads to the soft power crisis.
The brand versus the reality.
Right. Think about the image Korea exports: K-pop, BTS, Blackpink, flawless skin, youth, energy, hyper-modern, high-tech cities. That's the brand.
The global phenomenon.
But the reality on the ground is Min-jin burning out in his office and Kenji getting rejected by a movement that views him as a biological liability. You have the split screen, the glossy export versus the grim, aging, atomized reality. The state is terrified that if the world sees the real demographic rot behind the K-pop facade, the soft power evaporates.
It's a facade. We're selling a vision of the future neon Seoul, cyberpunk Tokyo, while the people living inside that vision are biologically hitting a dead end.
And that's the perfect segue to the physical reality of that vision, because Min-jin and Kenji didn't just decide to be stressed in a vacuum. They were living in an environment designed to stress them. We have to talk about the city itself as an enemy combatant in this story.
This is the part that hit me the hardest. We treat the city like a neutral stage where our lives happen, but the research suggests the city is an active participant in this degradation.
It's an actor in the play, a very hostile one.
There's a narrative I've been piecing together from various interviews about the biological price of the modern megalopolis. Consider a young architect in Shanghai or Seoul.
Okay.
He's living in a Goshen one of those tiny cubicle rooms, or a small studio, working 12-hour shifts under the constant hum of LED lights and the invisible weight of psychosocial pressure. We often talk about urban burnout in terms of mental health, but the 2026 findings suggest something far more visceral.
It goes deeper than the mind.
I've been thinking about how these extreme environmental stressors act as epigenetic accelerators. Imagine this young man's body as a high-precision machine being overclocked until its internal clock. Specifically, his germline RNA begins to malfunction. The city, with all its efficiency and light, becomes a biological furnace.
A furnace, that's a powerful image.
I heard a poignant reflection from an urban researcher who suggested that we are effectively stressing ourselves out of the gene pool. When I read stories like this, I feel a deep sense of empathy for a generation caught in a biological pincer movement. The social pressure to delay birth, and the environmental pressure that ruins the chance of birth once the delay is over.
It's a catch-22 written in biology.
As someone who analyzes these trends, it feels like we're watching a slow-motion collision between our evolutionary biology and our architectural ambitions. We've built cities that are marvels of engineering but are, for the male biological clock, essentially high-stress incubators for degradation.
They're masterpieces of civil engineering and disasters of biological engineering.
It's a sobering thought that the more advanced our civilization becomes, the more it seems to signal a biological dead end for the very people who built it.
Stressing ourselves out of the gene pool. It's a brutal phrase, but the science backs it up completely. We need to look at the concept of epigenetic age acceleration.
Okay, define that. My driver's license says I'm a certain age. My cells disagree.
Fundamentally, yes. You have a chronological age, which is just the number of times the Earth has gone around the sun since you were born. But you also have a biological age, which is measured by markers on your DNA, specifically DNA methylation patterns.
So it's like the wear and tear on your genes.
It's exactly like the wear and tear. I use the analogy of rust on a car. Two cars can be the same model year, the same chronological age, but if one was parked by the ocean its whole life and the other was kept in a climate-controlled garage, their level of decay, their rust age, is totally different.
And the city is the ocean.
The city is the salt spray, the constant wind, and the acid rain all at once. The research coming out of places like Duke Space is unambiguous. They highlight something called traffic-related air pollution. We're talking about those tiny PM 2.5 particles from diesel exhaust.
We usually think of pollution as bad for your lungs, coughing, asthma. But you're saying it goes deeper than that.
It goes right to the DNA. The Castian cohort study showed a significant direct interaction between a person's long-term exposure to this kind of pollution and an acceleration of their DNA methylation age.
So breathing the air in a mikitationi literally makes your cells get older, faster.
Yes. You breathe in these particles. They're so small, they enter the bloodstream directly through the lungs, and they cause low-grade systemic inflammation throughout your entire body.
And this brings us back to that term ROS I saw in the background notes, reactive oxygen species.
ROS. Think of them as tiny sparks flying off a running machine. In small controlled amounts, those sparks are actually functional. They're used for signaling. They actually help with the process of sperm maturation.
A little bit of stress is good.
A little bit is necessary. But the modern city, the pollution, the processed food, the lack of sleep, the constant blue light from screens, the psychosocial stress, it turns that small shower of sparks into a flamethrower. It creates overwhelming oxidative stress.
So the young architect in his tiny studio, he's essentially rusting from the inside out. His whole system is on fire.
He is under constant biological siege. His body is in what the research calls a pathological status. The high ROS levels are like tiny grenades going off. They attack the sperm cell membrane, they damage the DNA, and they corrupt that precious RNA payload we talked about earlier.
He's overclocking his system to meet the deadline for the skyscraper he's designing, but the overclocking is frying his own biological motherboard.
The irony is just suffocating. To be successful like Minjun or Ken, you must move to the city. That's where the high-paying jobs are. That's where the status is.
It's the only way up the ladder.
But by moving to the city to get the resources to afford a family, you enter an environment that chemically erases your biological ability to have that family.
It's the evolutionary dead end. The environment selects against the very people who are most adapted to it socially. The ones who win the rat race are the ones who lose the biological race.
And this feedback loop is what makes the 2026 verdict so damning. It's not just men need to eat better and get more sleep. It's the entire structure of modern urban ambition is a sterilization chamber.
You can't just tell that architect to relax more.
How can you? You can't tell Minjin to just relax when his rent is 60% of his income and the air he breathes is full of diesel particulate matter. The problem is structural, not individual. The Levy Institute paper talked about resource constraints. Well, clean air, quiet, and low stress are resources, and we have completely depleted them in these megacities.
So let's try to pull these threads together. This is a lot to take in. We started with Ken and his whiskey, this picture of smug confidence, thinking he had all the time in the world.
The infinite option.
Then we looked at Minjo, the quant analyst, finding out his financial account is full, but his biological account is bankrupt.
The hidden debt.
Then we looked at Kenji in Tokyo, realizing the dating market has flipped on him. It's become a lemon market where he is the lemon.
His biological high ground is gone.
And finally, we have the young, anonymous architect trapped in a biological furnace of a city he is helping to build.
It's a tragedy in 3 acts: economic, social, and environmental. And they all converge on this one inescapable biological fact. The sperm RNA clock doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about your stock portfolio or your promotion.
The 2026 verdict is effectively a judgment on the entire East Asian success story. We thought we could trade biology for economy. We thought we could pause evolution while we build GDP.
And nature just sent the bill. The debt collection notice has arrived. The debt is being paid in a population that is shrinking, aging, and fracturing.
And maybe that's why the 4B movement and the herbivore men exist. We call them radical, we call them strange, but maybe they're just the first ones to read the bill.
They're canaries in the coal mine.
They're looking at the cost of participation, the burnout, the health risks, the bad deal, and saying, I'm out. The game isn't worth playing.
It's an adaptation. If the game is rigged to destroy you, the only winning move is not to play. The challenge now, the immense civilizational challenge, is what comes next. If the infinite option is gone, we have to rebuild society around the reality of our limits. We have to acknowledge that we are biological creatures first and economic units second.
That's going to be a painful pivot. It means dismantling the very idea of the fortress Ken was so proud of building.
It does, but the fortress was a tomb anyway. It was always going to be a tomb. Better to dismantle it and build something that lets the light in, something where the air is clean and the clock isn't ticking quite so loud.
The safe high achiever strategy. It was actually a biological trap all along. That look of sudden cold realization on my friend's face the moment he realized the fortress he built might end up being a tomb for his lineage. That is exactly the crisis currently dismantling the East Asian family myth. We spent a century believing we could outrun nature with social capital. But the biology we ignored has finally sent us a debt collection notice, and we're now realizing the career-first contract might have been a scam all along.